Welcome, everyone, to Our Whole Lives Taking Flight. My name is Reverend Amy Johnson, and I serve as the Minister for Sexuality Education and Justice in the United Church of Christ. I'm excited to be here today, and we're back after our summer break. I want to introduce back by popular demand. You may have seen them before on any number of Our Whole Lives Taking Flights and other things, but Marshall Miller and Dorian Solot are here today with us. And we are excited to have them back. And I'm going to give them a minute to tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll jump into our topic today, which is learning about bodies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It is an honor to be back with you today. So I'm Dorian Solot. I use she, her pronouns. And Marshall and I are parents and sexuality educators. And most recently, the co-authors of the second edition of Our Whole Lives K1. We love hearing about how that's going from people who are out there teaching it. And we are also the co-authors of two new books for little kids called All About Vulvas and Vaginas and All About Penises.
Yeah, and I'm Marshall Miller. My pronouns are he, him. Always great to be back on an OWL webinar. Love talking with you, Amy, and being part of this community. And I'll just add, in addition to everything that Dorian said, that I'm an OWL trainer, and it's interesting. We're coming up on 25 years, which is pretty amazing. Time flies when you're teaching sex education.
Pretty fun.
Yeah, Marshall's a OT, original trainer in our whole lives, and we're just very honored to have this history and continue on this work, which we say is lifespan work, and I think that we are embodying that here today. I want to just make, as you had talked about Alpha K1, I just want to make a little announcement that today, if you're watching this after this, today is September 4th, 2024, and we ran out of K1. It's been so popular, it had to be reprinted. And all of the editions of K1 are actually being mailed today to our warehouse. So we will have them back in stock very soon. So if you have ordered them, you will be getting them soon. And so we now have an Our Whole Lives K1 that's secular, and we have Our Whole Lives UCC edition with the faith components incorporated, and we also have Our Whole Lives with the UUA edition that has the faith components for the UUA incorporated. So yay, LK1, the revisions and fabulousness continues. And after they wrote Alpha K1, I think Dorian has a little story about how and why these books got started, but I just want to say how thrilled I am about these resources. They're beautiful. I think you're probably going to talk about your illustrator too, who illustrated another book that's just fantastic and so inclusive and representative, just beautiful and normalizing of so much, which is just fantastic. And these books, I mean, no surprise, right, y'all? No surprise. Marshall's been an OWL trainer for over 25 years, and they're parents of kids who have taken OWL, and they just have all kinds of OWL cred. And so, of course, these books just sing Our Whole Lives values loud and clear. And I love them, and I can't say enough great things about them. And I'm just so glad that they are here and they're available. And I'm delighted that we're talking about this today. So I'm gonna quit effusing for right now and turn it over to you all. Dorian, can we start with you and like why you wrote these
Yeah.
books? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for all those kind words. I'm
Yeah.
extremely touched to hear it all. Yeah, I would love to tell all of you how these books came to be. So, as you know, Marshall and I had done all this work, which was really, really fun, interesting, juicy project to work on of sort of taking the 20-year-old edition, which was amazing, of LK1 and updating it for the current decade. So we had done that work, which involved reviewing, looking at hundreds and hundreds of children's books on these topics, children's books about bodies and babies and families and gender, and just like looking at everything out there, published by major publishers, published, self-published. We had the local library had a shelf set aside for me because I was putting in so many book requests from all over the country, interlibrary loan. All these books were streaming in. We spent so much time with these books. And then one day, my sister called me And her son at that point was 4 years old. And she called because I'm like the sex educator, big sister. And she said, my son, this is my nephew who's 4, has so many questions about his penis. She said, can you just tell me what book to buy him? Because that will answer his questions. It's good for 4-year-olds about penises. And I was like, there isn't really a book for 4-year-olds about penises. And I was like, I mean, there are books that will have an illustration of a penis in it as part of talking about, bodies. And there are pictures of, naked bodies and kids and grown-ups and how we change as we grow up. And there'll be like a little line with an arrow being like penis, but like an entire book about the penis that doesn't exist. And my sister, and I was pretty confident about that because I had looked at so many books. And my sister was shocked. She was like, how could there not be a book for little kids about penises? Like, he has so many questions. I'm sure he's not the only 4-year-old asking his parents questions all the time about his penis. He's very interested in it. And I was like, I don't know, there isn't one. But I was like, what would be in it if there were? So she listed out these topics, and I sat down when I hung up the phone and wrote the first draft of what became all about penises. Very much written for the questions of his cute little nephew. And of course, it evolved and we added in other topics, and consulted with pediatric urologists and really got to dive pretty deep into the subject of like, what do little kids wonder about? What do they need to know? What do they deserve to know about these parts of their bodies? And then, of course, once we had that framework, we could easily go on and write the equivalent all about vulvas and vaginas for kids who are curious about that part of their body or those parts.
Yeah,
Did you
just to
like, do you
add on
get
to
like
that.
big sister credit forever now for doing that?
Forever, forever.
Sorry, Marshall, go ahead.
No, that's great. So proud. Yeah, I think part of what's so interesting about, I mean, as many of you know, in terms of updating the K1 curriculum from the first edition to the second edition, is just how much has changed since then, since it was first published, in terms of the availability of books on different topics. And even in the last couple of years, there have been more books coming out on all sorts of topics related to consent and body boundaries and just figuring out what's the most effective, inclusive way to be able to teach young children about these topics. So it's really an honor to be like, okay, here's one area that isn't covered yet. Let's create something that very much, as Amy just said, is built on a foundation of our values, which I think are values that all of us on this Zoom share as well, in terms of just how to communicate about these topics in a way that's inclusive and effective and respectful of diversity, and actually teaches young children the things that they're interested in and want to learn about.
So what are some of the things that you learned that young kids want to learn about these body parts?
So
Go
Marshall,
ahead, Jordan.
do you want to back up to
Yeah,
like why even talk about these body parts with little kids at all? Why does it matter? Because people still argue. If you sort of
right.
search
Yeah.
out in the world for reviews of these books, there are people who are like, kids don't need to know about this. This is unimportant and not the right age to be talking about these body parts with children.
Mm,
Yeah. In
mm.
fact, we thought that would be sort of a fun topic to put to all of you. So maybe, Laura, if we can put in the chat, we're interested in the sort of question of like, okay, like why teach kids about genitals? Why is this important? And curious to hear from all of you your thoughts on this.
We'll read some of your answers aloud.
So go ahead and put your answers in the chat and we'll go ahead and read them out loud. So especially so people who are watching this later can hear some of the answers. But like why should we teach kids about genitals? Why is it important?
We'll see if people have access to the chat. And if not, we'll give you some answers. We'll give you our answers. We've thought about this a little bit, more than a little bit.
I
If
see
you'd like,
one.
Oh,
go
oh,
ahead,
right.
Marshall.
Yeah, so there are a couple things coming in. Should questions go in the Q&A and not in the chat? Do you have a preference in terms of how that works, Amy?
Yes, please put your questions in the Q&A. Thank you for asking that. We usually say that at the top. I didn't say that. I also didn't say that Melanie Davis is on vacation and that's why she's not here. So thank you for your grace with me not saying all those things. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat. But the answer to this question, sorry, let me back up. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A, which is a feature at the bottom of your screen. On mine, it looks like a little box with a question mark in it. But answering this question of why is it important to teach young children about their genitals or about genitals in general, please put that answer in the chat. And there are some we're saying.
It's great to see some of the answers coming in because they are readily available, because it is part of their body. Know thyself. Kids are exploring and have the questions whether we want to acknowledge it or not, because we shouldn't make them mysterious. If we don't talk about genitals, it can lead kids to feel like they're unmentionable and something to be ashamed of. As a former foster parent, it's critical for kids to know the real names of their body parts. Abuse happens. You want to take the rest, Dorian?
Sure. Understanding their own bodies, helping them to understand their boundaries for safety. Great way to build a relationship with your child as a trusted educator. Yeah, as a parent, as an educator of your own child, as an askable parent. This is made to be an incredible taboo topic. Maybe we'll just read these last two. We should be informed about and know how things work, especially that which we use every day, especially when it's my body. I'd personally like to know more about how my car works. Yes, many of us feel that way. What is happening in that car? Not talking about it creates shame. Yeah, these are fabulous answers, and I agree with everything that all of you said here. Did you want
Yeah,
to?
Maybe you're going to write a book called All About Cars now because
That
you.
might be next. A Learning About Cars book.
Hmm.
uh, so yeah, we see the comment about Dorian's microphone being softer. We'll see if we can
Hmm.
work on that.
Okay.
Um, So yeah, I mean, for us, it's very much in the same theme. Like we teach about other body parts, like why not these? Like, and I think some of you hit on that theme of sort of shame and silence, and in some ways that creates a bigger deal than it needs to be, as opposed to just being straightforward and talking about it. Certainly in terms of health and abuse prevention, if something doesn't feel right, it gives them, something is itchy or sore, it gives them language to be able to talk about that. And it does help prevent sexual abuse, and we can talk more about that later. But just the sense of getting a child who is empowered to use language about their body parts and be able to describe exactly what's going on may be less likely to be victimized. A person who's interested in potentially grooming that child, maybe aware, like, okay, this child is able to talk about this with others. And if abuse were to occur, a child will be able to describe what has happened to them.
Absolutely. I found a setting to turn up my microphone. So the person who thought I was quiet before, let us know if it's a little better now. We wrote these books primarily targeted for 3 to 7-year-olds, although we have heard from parents of both younger kids and older kids that they found it useful. So it really depends on the needs and interests of that particular child. Better. Great. Glad to hear that.
All right, so yeah, is it back to sort of Amy's question of like why do this? Why talk about this? Or no, your question was even like, what do we find that people are interested and wanna learn about? And it was quite fun to, as Dorian said, we had professional expert readers and including Amy like giving us advice in terms of like how does this, different areas of expertise for people who work with children. Then we had plenty of parents read it and also kids. Parents read it to their kids and gave us feedback. And that was super helpful because there were some things that the kids noticed, including our own children who are a bit older now, but also even though they're preteen and a teen, we're still willing to give us a little bit of their time and pointed out some things that the no adult readers had noticed. So we're like, this is super helpful in terms of the book. Um, so yeah, we can give you some sort of behind the scenes thinking about all that. One thing that isn't so much sort of a question, but is really a core part of, I think, people thinking about a book like this, and Amy had mentioned, is this the diversity and having kids wanting to see themselves reflected in a book, and also recognizing that kids are incredibly diverse. We were thrilled to have Tyler Fetter as our illustrator who wrote Bodies Are Cool, who many of you may be familiar with. In fact, Laura, if we could put the link on Amazon to Bodies Are Cool, folks can check it out. But she just does an amazing job in that book, and that skill sort of carried over to ours in terms of just representing all different kinds of bodies, not only in terms of very diverse gender presentations and identities and race and ethnicity, but also ability and disability and just the many ways in which humans, and in this case, kids can look. So we were thrilled. We were familiar with her book and thrilled that she was willing to be our illustrator and worked out with the publisher, and that all that sort of carried over into that representation of diversity carried over into these books.
Absolutely. There was a question very early on that we circled back to a few times with the publisher. Should this be two separate books or one book? You know, most books about anatomy for little kids have penises and vaginas and vulvas all in the same book. And they're like, some bodies look like this, some bodies look like this. Or maybe slightly less inclusive, like slightly less trans-inclusive books will be like, boys look like this, girls' bodies look like this. Um, and we went back and forth a few times, but we really kept coming back to the idea that kids and families may be interested in different ones of these books at different times. There are certainly people who will just like want the book for the genitals their kid has. But you can also imagine a situation where you have a 4-year-old who's asking about his penis, but then a couple of years later, that family has a new baby and that baby has different genitals. And suddenly it's like there's a different conversation happening at bath time or when during diaper changes. So we were like, you know, different families, or you can imagine a family with two moms whose little girl, you know, who's a child who also has a vulva. But then at some point, maybe they want to read about vulvas, but at some point, I'm going to be like, you know what? It's important for you to know that not everybody in the world has a vulva. Let's get the other book. And recognizing that those moments may not happen at the same moment. And sometimes you might want to answer your kids' questions or teach your child about one thing. And the moment to have the other conversation is a different time. So we did make the decision to have these be separate books. And I'm feeling good about that. Interestingly, I thought the penis book was going to be the top seller. But so far, the vulva book is outpacing the penis book in terms of sales, only a little bit, but I suspect it's all those feminist parents.
Do you have like a thermometer thing going like?
Like, yeah, on the wall, like a digital one, like, oh, today, 4 more copies of the penis book sold.
Right. It's a
No.
very funny thing that just even looking at the books on Amazon this morning, the vulva and vagina book is discounted. I guess it's part of a Labor Day sale, so it's only $13, which I thought, is certainly going to help
Which,
that thermometer all the more.
but the penis book is not. Yeah, I'm
Right.
very, we have no power over what Amazon does, but Vulvas and Vaginas, the book, are on sale today.
One of the interesting things in terms of again back to your question, Amy, was sort of what kids were interested to learn about was erections. And just a lot of sort of questions coming up when this thing sort of spontaneously happens, like what's going on with my body. Do you,
Yeah, and this was, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead, Dorian.
This was really new, something that I learned in the process of working on those books as a sexuality educator and obviously an adult who'd been working in this field for many years. I did not realize how, and I'm the parent of 2 kids who were assigned female at birth. I did not realize how common it was for little kids with a penis to find erections uncomfortable, painful, strange, weird, like not necessarily positive words for the sensations. And we even had a friend who has 2 kids with penises say to us, both of my kids used to cry when they were little, when they would get erections, because erections happen. Erections happen in utero when kids, when babies are still fetuses. They happen, when there are infants who are wearing diapers, like all the way through. Erections are just something penises do. It's like bodies practice the whole blood flows in and blood flows out. It does not obviously mean the same thing. All the meanings that we put on top of erections in adult bodies, those meanings are not there for kid bodies, but the erections are still happening. And the more that I realized, and the pediatric urologist who consulted on this book, on these books, who was lovely and so helpful, said it was one of the most common reasons parents bring their children, their very young children, to her, is because they're saying it hurts when I have, when my penis gets like this, and she has to reassure them. She does all these visits with parents saying, no, this is fine, this is normal, this is there's nothing wrong here, there's no medical issue, this is a common experience. Yeah, someone saying I'm learning so much. I didn't know males could have erections in the womb. Yeah, this is all so fascinating. It's just bodies doing their thing and making the blood flow around. And I thought, well, gosh, as a sexuality educator, if there's this experience, which is commonplace that little kids are having, that is uncomfortable, painful, weird, like sort of, makes them feel uncomfortable, isn't that exactly what education is for? Like, shouldn't we be talking to kids and teaching kids about this? As far as I'm aware, I don't think there's ever been a kid's book that mentioned erections, that they could feel good or bad or weird or funny or uncomfortable, all those different kinds of experiences, and just normalized it. But I thought, like, if it's such a common experience, isn't that exactly what education is for? And so that topic is in the book. And there's even I'm just going to show a picture of a child. This lovely illustration that Tyler did of a child looking a little surprised at this experience that is happening for them.
And I also, I know I have like 2 questions, or well, a question and a comment. So I'll do the comment first because I see in the chat someone saying they didn't realize that bodies with penises could have erections. And yes, and bodies with vulvas and vaginas can lubricate as well in the womb. That happens as well. Um,
And clitorises also get erect, although it isn't
yes,
as visible to us.
yeah.
But those of us with clitorises may feel that sensation. So I'm sure that's happening too, even though again, we may not be able to see it on an ultrasound.
So a question that I have is, do you know if there is any research or if anybody's tracked at all if there's a difference in sensation with an erection for young kids depending on whether or not the penis is circumcised?
I do not know.
Just one.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. My guess from the various conversations I'm having is that it is certainly normal and common for intact, uncircumcised penises to have this issue of like, oh, it doesn't feel good. Or maybe it even hurts, and parents can just reassure their kids that it's temporary, it passes, it's short term, and sometimes readjusting, the direction it's pointing or sort of how your underwear is, like things that adults figure out how to
Yeah,
make those adjustments in subtle and appropriate ways and subtle and appropriate places, that kids may not know, like, oh gosh, if you change the way it's angled, that might really make it hurt less.
yeah. Great, thanks.
It was an interesting process in terms of sort of thinking through what topics to include in these books, because of course they're children's books and they're limited number of pages and limited attention spans. And one of the things we sort of ultimately landed on was just thinking through, like, this is sort of the visible kind of like external part of the body that the children are kind of like thinking through and experiencing and dealing with. So for instance, in terms of the testicles, here are pages that talk about how they may get closer to or farther from the body uh, based on the temperature outside. And while testicles and the sperm obviously are used for reproduction, we decided not to do the equivalent sort of discussion of ovaries, since that wasn't something kids were necessarily aware of or thinking about at this age. Although certainly parents could choose to teach about, and instead in the equivalent vulva or vagina book, spend those pages on discussing other topics that were more relevant.
Right. Our rule, our sort of guideline, our internal guidelines was like, if they can see the body part, if they're in the bathtub and they can look down and see the body part, then let's teach them about that body part. And if it's something that's inside their body that they can't see, that's a wonderful thing for them to learn about, but it's not going to be the focus of these books. But then we did choose to include the clitoris because it met that guideline. You can look down and see it, and it's just a body part with a name that's there. This one was really important to us as people who've been teaching college students about their bodies for years and realizing how common it is for college students who have a clitoris and college students who don't have a clitoris to be a little fuzzy on exactly where it is and exactly why it's there and what it's for. And of course, in terms of embryonic development, the clitoris is the equivalent, the analogous body part to the penis. It's really, really important for pleasure. And so we decided it's going to be in these books. Some people, disagreed with that decision, but it felt important to us. And the books don't say a lot about it, but they say that it's there and it has lots of nerve endings. So it felt like it's just important to grow up knowing that part is there and not have it be a big surprise that somehow you learn about when you're a young adult or some later point in your life.
So thank you for saying that, Dorian. And also I just want to back up a little bit because I'm wondering if everybody knows that about the genital tissue in utero, that it starts out
Yeah.
one way, and then there's a hormonal wash, an androgen wash that happens that or doesn't happen, that then determines whether that tissue will turn into a penis or remain more like a vulva and a
Yeah.
vagina
So,
and a
so when you
clitoris.
look at the very earliest embryos, they all look the same and they all have that same tissue that has a lot of nerve endings. And then some of that tissue, as you said, develops into being a penis and some develops into being a clitoris. And we teach, again, this is college student appropriate, not little kid. This is not something we teach young children about. But that, for adults who are seeking sexual pleasure, ignoring the clitoris is kind of the same thing as ignoring the penis, trying to have a pleasurable sexual experiences without any stimulation there. And that's, how important the clitoris is to adult sexuality. And of course, as facilitators of OWL, as educators, I'm guessing most or all the people here already know that. But always good to remind people who were, teenagers and adults who are teaching, who are thinking about those types of issues.
There's a comment that came into the chat. My daughter will be 10 tomorrow. She's very curious about things and I welcome it. I'd rather educate her then she learned it from others and the information possibly being wrong. Bodies are always changing, and she is so curious. I love being part of this because we were able to discuss things scientifically and medically, but also with the host being from a religious standpoint. This makes me very happy and so comfortable to share these viewpoints and perspectives. So yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. We appreciate that.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think I'll just say to that point that that both the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ have had this commitment for over 25 years of providing inclusive and comprehensive and medically and scientifically accurate education about bodies and relationships and sexuality and identity and all of those topics and more, decision making and consent and families and diversity and all of those things as a way of celebrating the dignity and worth of humanity. And as the Christian denomination, the United Church of Christ, our language, is about the beauty and diversity of God's creation. So we celebrate that, and that is something, again, a few of you have talked in the chat about the importance of teaching about this so that we don't end up inadvertently or intentionally shaming people about their bodies. We know that shame and stigma can be very damaging and even fatal sometimes. So the idea of us, sometimes it can feel countercultural, particularly in certain religious environments, but I believe it's very important to teach about our bodies and all the parts and celebrate them and not shame people, because that is not only helpful and healthy, but in terms of just medically, and also what we know socially about people growing up and understanding and not having body shame, but also as a religious practice of understanding that we're embodied people and those parts were created. It's not like, and from a Christian standpoint, it's not like God created everything except the penis and clitoris and vagina and vulva, like we have words for those body parts and they are not secret or shameful. That's
Yeah.
adult baggage that we put on that. And for little kids, it's just who they are, like their nose and their ears, right, Dorian? But belly buttons we will call navels, yes?
I, and I think asexuality, she's laughing because I told her this story about an interview I did about the book, the very first interview I ever did about the books, where I was trying to make the point that we teach children, we use the real words for all the other body parts. So why are we saying hoo-hoo and pee-pee and all these silly words? Why do parents do that for genitals? But I made the mistake of giving it as examples. I was like, we teach kids their eyes and their ears and their elbows and their belly buttons. And then I thought, wait a minute, belly buttons. That's not a good example because that is another example where we do the opposite. We don't teach kids the real word. We use this like funny little kid word, and that isn't. We taught our kids belly buttons, so I don't think that's necessarily a mistake. It just wasn't a good example for the point I was trying to make in the interview. I learned my lesson, but I was just going to say that as sexuality educators, I think that people often assume that when you teach sex education, you throw values out the window. Like we're values free. We just, anything goes. When in fact, the opposite is true, that teaching sexuality education is enormously about values. We are teaching values about consent, about bodily autonomy, about just about communication, that it's okay to ask questions and it's okay to talk about things and answer those questions. And, teaching these books are full of facts about little kids and their bodies, but we also, values are absolutely imbued, embedded in these books.
Yeah, and I can't say enough about how beautiful the illustrations are and the language that you used around just normalizing that kids are curious about their bodies and that bodies look so different and that there isn't, just like as you're saying, like just like there's not one way that a nose looks or one way that ears look or one way that elbows look, and maybe your two eyes might look a little bit tiny different from each other, right? I know in a puberty class that I teach, it's not owl, there's another one that I teach, we talk about how your breasts are like your two eyes or your two thumbs or something, like they're very similar, and they might be a little bit different because they are separate, right? So but we don't talk about the body parts and the names of things at the same way that we do about head and shoulders, knees and toes kind of thing. So, so having a very normalizing way to talk to young kids about it is important, and other things as well, right? Other reasons why you would read these books. Um, uh, Somebody had mentioned being the foster parent and abuse, and I know that you two did a ton of research about abuse prevention for ALK1, and these books kind of dovetail into that idea of being aware of what your body parts are and what they're called and what they're for. Can you speak a little bit about that and how that informed how you wrote these books?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with LK1, as you mentioned, Amy, we did a really sort of deep dive in terms of what is the latest thinking for this age group in terms of how to talk about sexual abuse prevention and what's most empowering or most useful for kids that age. And of course, it's the kind of thing that due to the overall awareness in society about sexual violence and survivors speaking about their experience, there's a lot that's been learned in the last 20 years since the edition of the first edition came out. And one of the things to really emerge from that was the idea of a trauma-informed approach. And that is recognizing that in so many cases, when you're talking about a child, particularly a child in this age group, and someone who's victimizing them, the power difference is so great that expecting or putting the burden on that child to be the one to sort of speak up and say no and report that to a parent or another authority figure, like that's asking a lot. That's something that even adults who have been victimized sort of struggle with and have to navigate. And it's really the responsibility of adults to create environments where it's very difficult for abuse to happen, which is part of the value of a safe congregation policy and sort of thinking through, how all that works. Not to get too much off track, but I know we're all these things are related to each other. So in terms of thinking
I'm going
about
to say
books
one
like,
more thing. This
yeah.
modified approach is also in response to survivors, adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, many of whom felt horribly guilty that they were never able to sort of follow the instructions that are given to children, where you say no and run away and tell an adult. And often the person abusing, because we know that abuse often happens from relatives, from step parents, from babysitters, people caring for children. Often the child likes that person, and abuse is not always painful. Sometimes it's inappropriate. It is always inappropriate, but it doesn't always hurt. And so it often leaves kids who are experiencing it feeling confused and mixed up, but often not feeling like there's any reason to run away and yell no, because they love this person or they're scared of losing this person, if they were to sort of tell in some way. So listening to survivors was a really important part of, I think, what led to this shift, this ongoing shift in practice. And certainly there are different perspectives and different opinions about it.
It was really helpful to work in the K-1 curriculum that's a Care for Kids, which is a sexual abuse prevention curriculum, really thought through very carefully what the language one can use in terms of recognizing what things are in the responsibility of adults, but also what things can be used to empower kids, should something happen. So this is how we uh, threaded that needle in terms of these books. So this one is from the All About Vulvas and Vaginas book. Um, it is always okay to say no if someone wants to touch these private parts. And then on the next page, it is very important not to keep touching a secret, even if someone tells you or you aren't sure about someone touching you or you feel mixed up. You may decide to talk with a grown-up.
And that language is extremely similar. I'm sorry to jump in to what is in ALK1. There's basically the exact same, approach, practice, and teaching this, pointing out that it's okay to say no. Not you must say no. We don't want to leave kids feeling guilty if they don't say no, but certainly saying no is always a really great option for kids. And recognizing that kids often say they feel mixed up. So saying if this is something that he feels confused or mixed up about, talking to a grown-up is a really nice thing to do.
And I really like how you talk about how it shouldn't be a secret, because I think that that's something that gets manipulated quite a bit with young kids sometimes, or some sort of manipulation around guilt, like that somebody's gonna be upset if you tell them or something like that. So making sure that like this shouldn't be touching shouldn't be a secret.
Yeah.
Mhm. And we
Absolutely.
also, in the back of each of the books is a parent information for parents and caregivers that includes a section on private parts and preventing sexual abuse that explains a little bit of this, what we've just been talking about with all of you in terms of how parents can think through this with their kids.
And other topics in that parent guide about things like, washing your kids' genitals appropriately, the care of those private parts, topics like masturbation, answering your kids' questions, being an ask all parent, lots of information about that. And a little bit before that parent guide is sort of concluding page about saying these parts of the body are special. They're different than other body parts, but they're also just parts of the body like everything else. And I love having that illustration that Tyler made of just lots of different body parts, and they're just like matter of fact in the mix with everything else. It doesn't need to be a big deal that's so very different from learning about anything else you're curious about.
I think that's so important. I think that that's a theme that I know we've talked about that several times, just even in this conversation today, but I just don't think we can say it enough. When we normalize all of our body parts um, and talk about taking care of them, right? Like you were saying, like, how do you wash an uncircumcised penis, right? Like, I know that was something like that we had to
Right.
learn in our house, right? And how do you care for those body parts when you're 3, when you're 7, when you're 12, when you're 17, when you're 27, when you're 67. Those things, they require care throughout our lives, and they're part of who we are. And if we're able to go to I used to, with the teenager classes, right, in our whole lives, we'd talk about language and what are the scientific names and what are people comfortable calling that. But like when you go to the doctor, you want to be able to say, my penis hurts when it's erect, not like, my wee wee is out. I mean, like there may be, I'm sure pediatricians have heard it all, right?
Sure.
But when you're 14, you would want to be able to say something that, made sense and was using language that felt respectful of your body and your
I
body.
have a very clear memory of being early in kindergarten, so I was presumably 5 years old, and my parents, who interestingly did use the correct names for genitals, we had a silly word for peeing or urinating. They would say, make a sissy. That was the word my family used. No big deal. We all knew it. We all used that word. But I was in kindergarten and I realized I somehow knew that's not the word other people use. But I wasn't sure what was the word to use, and I needed to go. And I remember having this moment of horror, like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I can't say to my kindergarten teacher, I have to make a sissy. I know that's not the right way to say it. And I didn't know. It's just there's so many examples of like the power of kids having the words that they can use with other people that other people will understand and that feel like the, medically appropriate words to use. Urinate might have been a bit much if I
Yeah, but
teaching
I
your
mean,
kids that you
but
like I need to go to the
yeah,
bathroom.
right. And to be able to teach our kids something that is going to be generally understandable in places like school, right? Like I can't imagine how stressful that must have been. Like my teacher's not going to know what I need to do, and I really need to do this. And
Right.
those are things I think sometimes we don't think about when we're talking about like why should we teach our children about this stuff? And we don't know what they don't know, and we sometimes will put on, like I said before, like we'll put on our adult lens about teaching kids about these body parts because we have we live in such a culture that sexualizes bodies and sexualizes things to sell things a lot. There's a lot of that. And that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there about different things and about bodies, but we miss that really important basic thing of like telling somebody that you need to go to the bathroom, you know?
Right. Sometimes parents forget that kids need to communicate with people other than them.
Yeah.
We need to communicate with the outside world about these same topics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I really just love about age-appropriate sex education. I mean, to have, our whole lives curriculum for all different age groups, recognizing that like, yes, these are the ways in which these body parts or these types of issues, including, some of the significant serious issues like sexual abuse prevention, play out and are sort of dealing with in which kids this age are dealing with it. And here's sort of information we can give them to have them be more empowered. And that's going to be very different than what we're teaching high school students or what the Out for Older Adults curriculum is going to cover. And as you said, Amy, we have these body parts our whole lives. They have different meaning when you're 5 years old than when you're 65, and different issues that may come up sort of medically or in the context of other people, whatever. And having the tools to be able to talk about them, to be able to seek help if issues come up, to be able to understand what's going on with one's body is empowering and important.
Absolutely, at any age and all ages, right? And I think that I think well, first of all, I want to go back and I just want to, I have my copies right here. And I just want to say, go get these books, everybody. Like, really, Laura, will you put we have Laura, our amazing admin here. If she could put the links and um oh, it's not Labor Day anymore, right? It was on sale, but not anymore. Is it not?
I think it is. If you go to
Okay,
Amazon
there's still
today,
a sale with the Vulva and Vaginas book on Amazon, apparently, which Dorian and Marshall have nothing to do with how Amazon decides what's on sale. But
And
um,
we're mentioning Amazon because there is that sale, but of course, we're delighted for you to support your local independent bookstore. Bookshop.org, which you may already know, is a site similar to Amazon. You can go buy books there, but the money goes to your independent bookstore instead of to Amazon. There's still, oh, someone already made a purchase and confirmed
Krista,
it's
thanks for ordering. That's great.
right, you
And
still,
if you're
any other bookstore of choice you choose.
if you want to be like one of those brave people at baby showers, you could give a set of these books to a baby
Love
shower coming near you, or um,
it.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, I think there, particularly with social media, encourages this. There is a subset of parents who very much want to be prepared for things that might happen in the future. So we've heard from a number of parents of kids, very young children, like newborns within the first 6 months, where these questions are still a ways out, who are like, yeah, like I want these books on my shelf to be prepared for the moment when the moment comes. Like I'm thinking about this now, like this is gonna, the questions about this may come up in the future, and I want to be ready to go.
I
Also,
would
what
say,
better way to just be like, it's just normal. It's just a book on the shelf, like all the other books on the shelf. These are topics we can talk about baby animals, we can talk about planets in the solar system, we can talk about penises and vulvas. It's just one more topic that's open for conversation in our house.
yeah, and I think that sometimes it can also be helpful for grown-ups who didn't receive, which is almost all of us, who didn't receive this kind of really great positive education when we were kids. And so we might learn something, honestly, by reading these books, and then we're able to answer questions and those kind of things. Um, there's another question about if the books discuss puberty at all. There's a little bit in there about how bodies change. There's tons of other books about puberty, and certainly Our Whole Lives for grades 4 through 6 deals with that a lot. And there's resources that we have about what other books are great to deal with puberty and the changes that go through that. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what some of them are. I know that Corey Silverberg has a great series of that's very inclusive about bodies. I think Sex is a Funny Word is the one for that kind of puberty age. But there's lots and lots and lots of books about puberty. Heather Currena has Wait What? There's a book I really love by Julie Metzger and Rob Lehman called Will Puberty Last My Whole Life? The answer, of course, is no, but it has some questions and answers in it based on gender. So yeah, lots of books out there about puberty. And maybe, I don't know, I mean, maybe this is going to be a continued series, right? Are there more coming with the Learning About Bodies books? Just to put you on the spot.
There is.
Yeah, there are. Um, So the third book in the series will be Ingredients to Make a Baby, which again, not a puberty book, but does answer a question that a lot of kids have. You know, where do babies come from? In a way that we feel like is fun and funny and inclusive, which I think so many people are sort of thinking through how to thread that needle of giving kids information that they need in terms of understanding how processes work, but also doing so in a way that's really inclusive, particularly along the lines of gender identity and sexual orientation.
I was going to say one thing about the little tiny bit that is on puberty in these books, and of course these are books for 3 to 7 year olds. They're not books for a child. They're not designed for a child going through puberty. They're not about puberty. There are better books for that, as Amy said. But the one point we really wanted to include was the idea that when you're a little kid, you probably don't have hair in your genitals, and hair will grow later on. And we thought that was important to include. And there's these nice pairs of illustrations with a little kid and the same kid when they're older in these books. And they have these lovely details where like they have the same interest when they're little and when they're big, but like when they're little, there's like a softball and a glove, and when they're big, there's a softball trophy, and there's like a kitten who grows into a cat and a little plant that has more leaves later on. So that's all Tyler Fetter, the amazing illustrator's credit. We didn't have that idea, but we loved it and we saw it, and the kids seem to love it too. But the reason why we wanted to include this is because there's so much negativity among young adults today and teenagers about having hair down there. The ideal, and I think a lot of this comes from images in pornography, the ideal is that you should still look like a little kid who's hairless. And we wanted to sort of plant the seed, even for younger children, that it is normal that hair will grow in that body part and that that isn't gross, it isn't disgusting, it's just part of what bodies do.
There's a question, some comments in the chat. Karen says, I want to compliment the authors on their K1 AL curriculum. It is so much more engaging and fun than the older version. Thank you. And you know, a credit to Amy and Melanie as well, because it was one of these things, oh, you want to, you know, revise the curriculum, and then we start down the path and we're like, okay, we're really rewriting the curriculum. So could we have like a few more months? Could we have 6 months? Could we have a year? And then, you know, glad that it's all
Years?
out.
No, it wasn't really.
Yeah, and
Oh,
thrilled at the sort of step two of the process, which Amy mentioned at the beginning of this webinar in terms of the integration of the faith components. So that'll be great to see.
yeah.
And what a great assignment. Like this has to be more fun. The feedback that, Amy and Melanie told us, this is not, it just isn't fun enough. There's not enough movement. There's not enough silliness for the young children we're teaching here. We have to boost the movement and boost the fun. And what a fun assignment is for adults to be like, okay, what can we do with this topic that would be fun and get up and move your bodies and sing a song or be silly? It was a fun assignment. And then we impose on all of you to do it, but we hope, and I'm glad to hear some feedback that that's been working.
I think also Dorian gets an award for new lyrics to old tunes in this curriculum, and every lesson has like an arts and crafts part and a song and a storybook and movement and it's just fabulous. So and we have trainings coming up. Oh gosh, Laura, I'm going to ask you to go find that link while I'm talking. If you go to ucc.org/all, you should find it. But if you can put the link in the chat for the trainings coming up, there's several still this year, and there's some elementary ones coming up. And then I don't think we have any thank you. I don't think we have any more online elementary trainings this year, but we will next year. And so if you want to get trained so that you can offer that K1 and 4th through 6th grade curriculum, take a look at our training calendar. There's also a one on the uua.org/re/owl. I'll put that in the chat. You can follow the training link there too. What else do you have for us today?
Yeah, so and while we're thinking of links in the chat, if you want to put in Laura, our website, which is learningaboutbodies.com, and then social media, you can find us on Instagram also at Learning About Bodies, and so you can search for that on Facebook as well. There is a question. I'm wondering if you could talk about if you talk about peer interactions and perhaps interactions from others from different cultures who may have different concepts of normal. So yeah, that is a great question. I think part of it is just giving parents, so it's a little bit outside the scope of, and again, with children's books are like they're very particular about like, okay, If you add one more page, you have to add 8 more pages, and that doubles the cost of the book. I mean, it's funny, like every word. I mean, having written several books for adults, there's really wide flexibility. Like if you turn in a 80,000 word manuscript compared to a 100,000 word manuscript, for the most part, the publisher's gonna be like, sure, we'll take the 100,000 words. Not true with children's books. So there's a limit to what we could cover. But I do think that is the kind of thing where each parent's sort of situation is unique in terms of what they're thinking through, and kind of empowering parents to be able to seek information and get support from other people. Like, oh, here's a question that's come up in terms of this friend that my child visits has that family has sort of a different set of expectations and values, and navigating that is a great place to find support in the OWL community as an educator, but also as a parent in terms of what some next steps might be. So, what else is of interest that
We're happy to answer other questions.
that's
Yeah, I'm just checking as well.
great
Yeah.
to see all the links.
All right. You got all the links in there for all your stuff?
Yes. Someone wrote, I'll help children understand that all body parts are sacred and not shameful. Absolutely.
So if you have other questions, please pop them in the Q&A. I do want to say, there were a couple people asking, like, this is the first time I've been on here. Do you do this? Are there going to be more? So yes, we're back after a little summer break. We usually don't meet in July and August, and we don't meet publicly in December. We have another webinar we do internally in December. But other than that, we're here on the first Wednesday of the month at the same time. And Laura put in the chat the link for next month's webinar, which is we're going to be talking with Lauren Baranow from Advocates for Youth, which would be a nice follow-on to this, because the reason we're talking with Lauren is because October is Let's Talk month. And so we're going to be talking about why would we talk about sexuality with kids and youth, and how, and what are some tips to do that, and how you can encourage that. I think, Laura just put in the chat also the list of the link to the whole YouTube playlist of all of our webinars that we've done in the past. And if you're watching this after the fact, all these links will be captured and put below the video screen on the YouTube playlist. If you click more info, you'll be able to find all those links. So if you have any other topics that you're interested in checking out to see if we've done a webinar about, it's likely we maybe have, because we've done a lot over the last 4 years. And we're going to be talking, like I said, next month about talking with kids about these topics and why it's important. And so I hope that you will have a reason to get these books that, like I said, sing Our Whole Lives values, whether it's for you personally, for someone you know, to have around your house in case little kids come over, just sitting on your bookshelf like every other book, like Dorian said, adding to your church library, having in your story corner with all the other Our Whole Lives storybooks, just so many reasons to support this amazing work. The more that we talk about this, I know that we were talking about, like, there's other books about different topics, and I just think I'm just going to say this again, like, this isn't one conversation that we have with kids, right? It's not just like this one conversation you have about your bodies, or about relationships, or about identity, or about who you are, or crushes you have, or what's going on in this part of your body, or how do you deal with this friendship. It's a lifetime of conversations. It's a lifetime of learning and discovering, and things change and evolve. And our hope is that we can provide you with some help along the way, and some great resources, and a community that will help you to be able to have healthier conversations, and get over any fear or discomfort you have, or do it anyway, even if you do have fear and discomfort. And again, like, read that book first before you share it with your kids, so that you're able to be really matter of fact and caring when you give this information to young people. And we hope that you can be those trusted adults that kids can go to and talk to about what's on their minds and hearts. Any last words for us, Dorian and Marshall?
Well, thank you so much for all your kind words, and yeah, appreciate all of you. Houston already bought the book, others who will, and mostly just spreading the word. I mean, that's we were sort of filling a gap that we felt like was missing, and we want any parent who has questions or dealing with their kids' questions to be able to know that these books exist and are available as a resource. So, thanks to all that you do, everyone listening to this in terms of sexuality education and making sure kids are knowledgeable and informed and empowered when it comes to their bodies.
And I'll add that one thing we're finding is that because of the cultural taboos around talking about this, most podcasts for parents will not talk about these books. Barnes and Noble does not stock them in the stores. They will order them for you, but they do not stock them in any of their stores, as far as we're aware.
A handful do, but only a handful.
Our local independent bookstore told us no. We said, we'll send our friends and neighbors to the local independent bookstore. And they said, we will not be carrying these books. So the more that those of us who believe this is important can do to recommend them, to review them so they have good reviews on Amazon, not just the haters, but also those of us who believe this is valuable and sacred work. Thank you for the support of everyone who already has them or plans to get them.
Thank you for sharing that. I hope we'll all go out and not only purchase books, but then write you a fabulous review. And
Thanks.
also, I just want to end on this note and say thank you for being the change that was needed, for seeing that there and hearing that there was something that hadn't been discussed and for doing something about it and not just going, oh, darn, there's no book about penises for my nephew, like I it's just very, very inspiring. So thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you everyone for being with us today, or if you're watching online, thank you for checking us out. We have so much more coming ahead. As we were getting ready for this, I'll just say, right as we got the note, I got an email come like right as I got on to talk to Dorian and Marshall and Laura before we started. I got an email saying that our 7th through 9th grade, Our Whole Lives material reprint is in stock. It arrived, and like I said earlier, the K1 editions are being mailed to our warehouses today. So we're excited about that because we've had a lot of things up in the air and out of stock for a long time. So it's exciting to have those back in. And thank you all for all that you do to support Our Whole Lives. Have a great day.
Thanks.